He was at your child's school board meeting on Monday. He gave the sermon on Sunday. He shook your hand and smiled at the neighborhood barbecue. And between all of it, between every ordinary, forgettable Tuesday, he was killing people. That is not fiction. That happened. Multiple times. In places exactly like where you live right now. There is a specific kind of evil that does not announce itself. It wears a tie. It goes to church. It remembers your birthday. And the most terrifying thing about it is not the violence hidden underneath. It is how long the people closest to it never saw a single sign. Criminals who live double lives are not rare anomalies. They are a pattern. A studied, documented, horrifying pattern of ordinary men who committed extraordinary horrors, sometimes for decades, while the world shook their hands. Today we are going inside that pattern, and by the time this is over, you will understand something about human deception that most people never allowed themselves to confront. We'll get to the one detail in the Harold Shipman case that investigators still consider the most chilling piece of evidence ever found. And we will also revisit one specific moment in Dennis Rader's neighborhood that should have ended everything, but didn't. Dennis Rader lived in Wichita, Kansas, in a modest house on a quiet street. He had a wife, 2 children, a dog. He was the president of his church congregation. He was a local compliance officer, the man neighbors would call when someone's grass grew too long or a fence post was an inch out of code. He was precise. He was organized. He was, by almost every account, annoyingly normal. He was also the BTK killer, responsible for 10 murders committed over nearly 3 decades, a man who sent taunting letters to police and journalists who described his crimes with clinical, almost bureaucratic detachment. The letters were signed with a nickname he created himself: bind, torture, kill. He chose it deliberately. He was proud of it. What made Rader so uniquely terrifying was not just the murders. It was the architecture of the life he built around them. He did not live in isolation. He was embedded. He was trusted. He had a title at his church. He had a position of authority in his community. Every layer of social credibility he accumulated was another layer of insulation from suspicion. When investigators finally closed in on him in 2005, 30 years after his first murders, the people who had sat beside him in the pews described the same feeling. Disorientation. Not shock in the way you might expect, but something deeper and more destabilizing. The sensation that the ground had quietly shifted beneath everything they thought they knew. Ted Bundy operated differently, but with the same core principle: weaponized normalcy. Bundy was educated, articulate, and conventionally attractive. He worked a crisis hotline. He assisted on political campaigns. He presented himself so effectively as a thoughtful, engaged citizen that his own friends and colleagues refused to believe the accusations long after the evidence was overwhelming. His confidence was the weapon. He understood, almost instinctively, that the person least likely to be suspected is the one who most actively performs belonging, who laughs at the right moments, who helps carry the groceries, who holds the door. Bundy played that performance without breaking character for years. He operated across multiple states. He evaded capture repeatedly. And when he was finally convicted, he attempted to leverage his own likability, his appearance, his manner, as part of his legal defense. There is something that connects Rader and Bundy to every other criminal who lived a double life. They understood social trust as a system that could be hacked. They knew that human beings have a strong psychological resistance to re-examining someone they have already categorized as safe. Once you are placed into trusted column, the mind actively filters out inconsistencies. That is not weakness. That is how communities function, but it is also an opening. Harold Shipman understood this better than almost anyone. He was a general practitioner in the north of England, a family doctor. The kind of man patients would wait months to see, not because appointments were scarce, but because they wanted him specifically. He was known for his patience, his attentiveness, his warmth. He was the doctor who still made house calls. Over the course of his career, he is believed to have murdered more than 200 of his own patients, mostly elderly women, using lethal doses of diamorphine. He would administer the drug during routine visits and then sign the death certificates himself, listing natural causes. The system trusted him completely because the system was built on trust. Here is the detail investigators found that changed the texture of everything. When police finally searched his records and began the methodical work of examining his patient files, cross-referencing his own clinical notes against the official death records, they found that he had altered the medical histories of some victims after their deaths. He went back in. He edited documents. He constructed a paper trail of declining health that had never actually existed. He was not just killing, he was curating the story afterward. He was, even in the aftermath, performing competence and care while simultaneously erasing evidence of what he had done. That is the architecture of the double life at its most refined. It is not just about hiding the darkness, it is about actively maintaining the light. It is the church president attending every meeting. It is the charming law student holding the door. It is the beloved doctor sitting at the bedside. The performance never stops because the performance is the protection. What these cases leave us with is not a simple lesson about watching for warning signs, because that framing misses the point entirely. These men operated for as long as they did precisely because the warning signs were buried under mountains of contradicting evidence. Evidence they created on purpose every single day. The uncomfortable truth is that criminals who live double lives exploit the very things that make communities function: trust, consistency, routine, social role. They use the mechanisms of belonging as camouflage. The real question these cases force us to sit with is not how they fooled everyone. It is what it costs to remain undetectable for decades, and whether the version of themselves they performed publicly was ever, in any moment, real at all. And that is what makes these stories so difficult to leave behind, because they do not belong only to dark alleys, abandoned houses, or distant headlines. They belong to kitchens, offices, churches, clinics, classrooms, and quiet suburban streets. They remind us that danger does not always arrive looking dangerous. Sometimes it arrives with references, manners, a clean shirt, and a reputation no one wants to question. But maybe the most disturbing part is this: a double life does not survive on lies alone. It survives because the truth is made inconvenient. People see something strange, but dismiss it. They feel something wrong, but explain it away. They trust the role more than the behavior, the reputation more than the evidence, the familiar face more than the uncomfortable instinct. And that is the final horror of men like Rader, Bundy, and Shipman. They did not simply hide from society. They studied it. They learned where trust becomes a blindness. They learned how goodness looks from the outside. Then they wore it like a mask. So the next time a monster is described as ordinary, remember, ordinary was not the opposite of evil. For them, ordinary was the disguise.
Welcome to Crime Reveals.